Hello, everybody. As Brian said with that very gracious introduction, I'm Josh Rubin, head of creative strategy for a publisher in town called The Daily Dot, and founder of Media ATX. Super quick background, because I am not a motion graphics or designer person and have no art talent whatsoever. I spent 10 years as a political producer with CNN, and now I'm here. And when I got to town, I felt like the only national media person for several hundred miles in any given direction. And as Brian said, I don't want to move. So I needed to figure out everyone else who was here in this city, what the communities look like. And if you're living in a place like New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles or DC, where 90% of the media is, it's easy. You can hang out with your community. You can stick to your silo. You can find that next job. But I don't know if you've noticed, media is in the state of more disruption than I've certainly ever seen in my professional career. And that's a huge opportunity for Austin, because we are not invested in the old infrastructure. We are not invested in the old ways of doing things. The challenge is that there are more people in one particular silo of media in New York, say radio, or journalism, or motion design, than there are in our entire media scene, which means it's incumbent upon all of us to not just talk to people in our scene. I'm a journalist. If I only talk to other journalists, I will get dumber. And the same goes for all of you as well. So it's about cross-pollination, which is why Brian and I have gotten along so well. And don't get me wrong, I can talk cartoons, but what I really can talk about and want to talk about is Austin, and what it takes to make it as a media professional in this town, what opportunities there are as media professionals in this town, and what they're seeing. So we'll start with the easy thing. Brian, I know you super well, so I'm just not going to start with you.
Okay, that's fine.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
So T3 recently acquired.
Yes.
How's that treating you?
You know, it's interesting. It's still new, so it's still, you know, we're trying to figure out what that means for us, you know, in the motion department specifically. I mean, that's kind of like most of what I see in the business, but you know, everyone seems optimistic, so I feel like it's going to end up being a good thing, but yeah.
And T3 is a great example of an agency that had, I mean, it was basically an email marketing agency at its inception when Gay Gaddis came in and started this thing, but have very much kept on top of trends and movements and have hustled very quickly. What kind of motion work and design work is T3 bringing to you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think they started in like Dell catalogs or something like that, and you know, now we're doing a lot of like social media work and things like that, like from a design and motion standpoint. But yeah, I mean, like we're still kind of like carving out like what our niche is in that sort of realm, and I don't know, it's been fun, you know, like Caleb, who's got the work on the back wall here, he and I have worked together pretty closely to, I don't know, kind of define like what kind of the future of the T3 motion scene could be, you know, which is kind of exciting.
So, how many people here are freelancers? All right, so here's the question that I actually, to kind of cut to the chase here. Is Caleb your boss?
Yes, Caleb is my direct supervisor.
If he fired you tomorrow, what would you do? How would you make a living as a motion designer, a graphics guy here in Austin?
And that is an interesting question, because he and I kind of talk about this like fairly extensively, but I try to stay busy, like I still take on like a ton of freelance, like outside of my T3 responsibilities, which is both exhausting and fulfilling. So, you know, there's kind of a balance to be had there, but you know, I feel like if T3 was like, see you later, I don't know, I feel like I'm in pretty good hands as far as like the people that, like the network that I've built around like freelance work and things like that. So I feel like I would pretty readily embrace the freelance lifestyle.
So even with, I was talking to someone earlier who was basically the one full-time editor at GSDNN, a massive agency. So the full-time gig in this industry, in Austin specifically, are few and far between. So you always feel like you need to hustle. You always feel like you need to be, pulling in extra work, networking.
And I don't know, like, I don't know if my full-time versus freelance experience is necessarily like typical, but I do like the security of a full-time thing. But
Healthcare is nice.
Yeah, great benefits. It's nice to have a solid paycheck and not have to hustle as much. But there's a certain level of creative fulfillment that I think can only be granted through like a freelance hustle, and I don't know. It's like I said, it's an interesting balance because part of it is like Kayla and I have sort of a unique opportunity to build like an in-house like motion sort of vision, but at the same time, I do have these opportunities to do the freelance like fulfillment thing. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the border of both at the moment. So
I would expect they feed into each other a little bit.
they kind of do, yeah. I mean, like there's definitely things that I learned from doing the freelance that I choose to take on that helps inform kind of the work that I do at T3 and vice versa. As far as like efficiency that I get from the agency mindset and things like that. But I don't know. There's always like an art sort of basis behind like every decision that I try to make, I guess.
And Brian, you were once in the enviable position of master of all you surveyed, design god of Rooster Teeth, and then life changes. How was that transition been?
A year and a half on the other side of it, a lot better. After we got bought by AT&T last year, there was just a lot of changes, and it ended up kind of becoming time to leave. And I think one of the reasons that I ended up staying, and I was the motion design director and design director at Rooster Teeth for about 7 years. I built the design department there. So really, kind of any of the like modern branding kind of came through me at one point. And I was kind of one of the first specialists at Rooster Teeth. Like everybody before that had kind of been generalists, and they hired a IT person and they hired a designer. And it was interesting. Like I think one of the nice things about sort of being in a position where you have a lot of influence in a small team. By the time you end up in a situation where there's now 400 of you, the way that system works is different. And so even if you're in the same position, you don't necessarily have the same amount of influence. So very early on, I had a very direct working relationship with, say, the CEO. But by the time you reach 400, the number of vice presidents that are above you and the CEO just means that the whole information flow changes. And so you just end up in a system where you built the period of rapid change slows. And it was interesting kind of getting to the point where you sort of had to rethink what that was. And I think I had stayed because I couldn't entirely picture another role in town that was like what I was doing there. And I think in ways that's held true since I've gone freelance. I've had a chance to work on some really exciting things, but it hasn't ever been quite the same job. But what I discovered was that there were plenty of other cool things that were just as satisfying. It was interesting. My first project when I left RT was actually working for T3, modeling dumpsters for a waste management website rebuild, because it is easier to render dumpsters than it is to bring them into a photo studio. So I was doing very sexy, 360 turnarounds of dumpsters, trying to introduce just the right amount of grime so that it looked cool without looking like a dirty dumpster. Man, I know so much more about dumpster construction now. When I'm walking my dog at night and we were walking through the parking lot, there was actually a couple of dumpsters that I was going up to and taking photos so that I could see how this weld joint looked. It was a very fascinating, you can find joy in anything. But, at the same time, a lot of the things that man, the number of dick jokes that I had to figure out how to animate in a proper way at Rooster Teeth, it was just like dumpsters and dick jokes, like they both have their, I guess, their place. You know, I still do plenty of
It sounds like a
things.
side project, actually.
Yeah.
Just bring those two worlds together.
Yeah, well, you know, I think what I discovered, and you know, I kind of built my way out of it was, you know, I have some of my own art up here around the room, these augmented reality pieces, and I kind of built this project to basically have something to be working on in between gigs. And I started doing this illustration when I left because I really didn't know what was next. And I just needed to start creating something. And I didn't even know what this project was. But I just started kind of putting these illustrations together. I was like, nah, maybe I'll make an art print or something. And kind of over 6 months of freelancing, it evolved into this augmented reality t-shirt company. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of these prints around the room. So after the talk, I hope you'll download the app and play with them. But, you know, I was kind of, you know, you just discover that, like, you fill in the freelance with what you can, and then you build joy out of the rest of your time.
I think that's a really important point. How many people here lived in LA at some point? New York at some point? Anybody DC? Great, DC. So these towns convince you that there is a dream job and that that is the goal. That is what you want, that is what you need. And that's, Charles, are your children still here?
No.
That is bullshit. For a variety of reasons. The biggest one being, and I think Austin taught me this more than anything else. I've been here about 10 years now. I was technically born here, but long story. Anyway, that it is actually the passion first, the community second, and the job is the thing that comes out of that. Because who here's been fired and escorted from the building at some point? You work in media, and that's what happens. But the community, and if you have a good community, is what lifts you up, is what finds you the next thing, is what brings the next opportunity to the fore. And this town, and I hope you've had a similar experience, is wicked collaborative.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that was really interesting to me is I'd worked, before I got to Rooster Teeth, I'd worked for a bunch of corporate clients. Like I'd worked for some nonprofits, I'd worked for some churches, like all like very small. I mean, it's all design and it's all like serving some sort of common good. Like I did a lot of medical device marketing for a while, and like I got really happy about the fact that I could potentially help save someone's life because they got a laser in their diabetic artery and suddenly they weren't going to lose their foot. But like, I ended up, like, when I got to RT and I was somewhere where people had seen what I was doing, I ended up putting a lot of like value in like, oh man, I finally accomplished something in my life, for better or worse. And so leaving, I kind of had to rethink what that was and like, where do I find value in myself? And I did have the community, and one of the interesting things was like, you know, we never even really watched Rooster Teeth, right? We don't really even understand exactly what you do. We just like you. And that was really, like I heard that a couple of different times. It was just interesting. Because in my head, it was just like, oh, well, you know, I'm only this because I get to do this here. And it wasn't true. But.
What gives you value and frankly meaning in the kind of work that you're doing? Does that play any role in the kind of projects you pick, the kind of direction, the emphasis you put?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like the fact that I do work full time and still choose to take on like freelance work gives me sort of like the freedom to choose more fulfilling freelance jobs, and that's an extreme privilege and I guess like the scope of what freelance means, I guess. But yeah, I mean a lot of the jobs that I decide to take are ones that I feel like I can either like stretch my technical abilities or might be a little uncomfortable like from I don't know, like it and somehow it is something that I try to like use to grow a little bit, so and that's nice to be able to like kind of figure out like in which areas I want to grow and to only take the jobs that from a freelance perspective, kind of allow me that sort of growth, and not to have to, like take on, because I have a salary, and the freelance stuff that I take on is always going to be extra, but yeah, I do appreciate the fact that I can kind of pick and choose the things that I want to work on.
So I don't know how long the talk is going for this particular section, but one thing that I want everybody here to just flat out do is, y'all walked in here with a few people, I'm sure. You are not here to network. That is not what this is about. Hopefully you're here to make a friend, to exchange a little bit of social capital, to see what they're working on. If they're working on something cool, great. Are you working on something cool? Share that. Environments like this are not about finding your next gig. They're about finding your next friend and your next node in the community. So everybody turn to somebody you don't know and say hi. Because I have the power, because I'm the moderator. So I want you all to keep talking amongst yourselves. We're going to take a quick break. Buy a drink to someone who's sitting next to you. Buy a drink for yourself. It's social lubricant. And we'll be back momentarily.
Yeah, we'll be back with Minnow Mountain.
Minnow Mountain!
And their tremendous series, Undone.